Hola, you are listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscila Luna. I am your host, and I'm so excited for today's episode. We have a doctora in the house.
Hey.
Woo! Dr. Lisette. All right. ¿Cómo estás? How are you today?
Hola Priscila, I'm doing well, and I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm so excited for our conversation. And as always, I just love being in community with other, poderosas, chingonas. I hope you don't take offense to those terms because to me,
Mm-mm.
okay. Yes.
Yeah, I love it too. It's always so amazing. And if you guys don't follow Lizette, she's been doing such a, I mean, for years, I'm sure, but like you've been just like collaborating in so many cool ways, and just like the information that you share. So, so
Mhm.
excited to learn about your story.
I think a big part of my work is talking about how important our stories are and how important our narrative is in our stories and being able to take a part in reclaiming our narrative. And so I am always excited to share my story because every time I get to share, I'm also reclaiming some pieces of the story. And so it's also healing for me to be here. Yeah.
Yes. And so with that said, we're going to start off with a little bit about your like upbringing, right? What it was like
Yeah.
to be a first gen. So if you could share a little bit about that, your cultura, let us in a little.
Yeah. And so I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, so specifically in North Hollywood. It's a city in Southern California. I'd always share with people, I'm like, it's behind the Hollywood signs. So behind all the glam, behind all of the, when people sit here in North Hollywood, I think there's a very specific image that comes to mind because they think Hollywood.
Yeah.
North Hollywood is not nearly as glamorous as you may imagine Hollywood to be, especially unless you've been to Hollywood, then you actually know what those streets are like.
Yeah.
That said, it was a big like cultural enclave for me. So the reason I bring that up, it's because I grew up in a predominantly Mexican Latina neighborhood. So and that was something that I didn't realize until much later was a protective factor for me.
Mm.
And so it had its challenges, but it was very, very special. So my parents are both immigrants. They're immigrants from Mexico and El Salvador. And they both came to this country and similar to I think what many other immigrants like journeys and motives are for. It was in search of one, a better life and also for survival. For my mother's from El Salvador, and she's the oldest of her siblings. There's four or five of them. It depends who you ask, depends how you count, because in Latina households, or like at least my mom's Salvadoran household, cousins became siblings, and it's just like a
Oh,
lot of, it's very, very
okay.
close. But when they came to the US, my mom, my grandmother, everyone came together. And it was when it just was very dangerous in El Salvador. So
Mm.
they came because, and this is sad, but this isn't I didn't know my grandfather, but my grandfather, my mom's dad, he was murdered when she
Wow.
was just a kid. And so then my grandmother was left alone and she had, I think like a 1 or 2 year old. I think my youngest uncle was like a baby when this happened. And so she's living in a really dangerous rural area in El Salvador as a woman on her own with a lot of young children. And so my mom's when I say sibling is this was her cousin, but became a brother. But I refer to him as Papa Vidal, right?
Oh,
And so
wow.
so he's I guess it's like my mom's brother, but also I think the father figure for that family after my
Mm.
grandfather was I guess passed away. And he arranged for my grandmother and my mom to come to the United States.
Okay.
Now, and I mean, and my other aunts and stuff. And so that was, I share this because I think, their immigration story um, is that of, I was like, I don't know how do I want to say this? My mom came in illegally, I guess you would say, like she was seeking asylum.
Mhm.
And it really was. for survival because once my grandfather was murdered, everything became very dangerous for her and her siblings and my grandmother. My first time my mom attempted to cross the border, they were held in a detention center, um, not granted asylum, and then they did it a second time and they were able to cross the border. Now, um, my parents are citizens now, which is why I feel very comfortable openly talking about this. But I think that that part of the journey is really important because it highlights also the different kinds of sacrifices that required from my mom. My mom has
Wow.
not been, yeah, she has not been in her home country since she left.
Yeah.
She's not gone back. And that was probably over 40 years ago.
Wow.
And um, her other siblings have gone back, but for my mom, it was just too scary and too traumatic. And so as the oldest, she just remembers a lot.
Yeah.
And so one of my like goals in life is to be able to travel to El Salvador with my mother, and to be able to experience that with her. And anytime I bring it up, she still hasn't been ready.
Okay.
There's always a fear. And so I'm like, we wait for her to be ready because but I would love, at some point, I mean, I might go on my own, but I share that because that informs a lot of who I am and how I became to be, who I am. I grew up with a very cautious parent, who's very protective of me, and who, was doing her best to keep me safe, but in many ways was, um, how would I say? It's like it would come off as not feeling not supportive in those moments, right?
Mm,
When I wanted to move away to college, there was a lot of frustration about me moving away. Um, but I'll get to that story in a second.
okay.
I just want to share about my parents a little bit because it's, like I love them very much. I mean, they're the reason I'm here and that I'm able to do everything that I am. And they're the largest source of inspiration for me because
Yeah.
any moment that I experience self-doubt, I'm like, can I do this? I think of those versions of my parents that had no idea what they were doing and just kind of had to throw themselves into some really dangerous situations to just figure it out.
Yeah.
And they figured it out so that I had more options, right? Um, so my mom came in the, like she's been here, and she had different jobs when she first came here, like working at I think she worked at a nail polish factory, a cassette making factory, if anyone knows what that is anymore. That's
My mom worked at a ribbon factory,
Oh,
like
ribbon
making
factory.
bows. Yeah, so I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and then ultimately ended up at Save On, which is now CVS. And so she works at
Mhm.
CVS and she still works there. She's been working there again, like I said, probably 30 years now.
Wow.
Um, and then my dad is from Mexico, but he was born in a small town called Tepesala. It's in Aguascalientes. But his family moved to the border when they were young because my grandfather had a job in El Otro Lado.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think he was a truck driver. He did a few different things. I think my grandfather worked in mining, all of these things, but it was not something we talked about too much, and not something I know about as much. And so but my dad's one of 11 children, and so they moved here, and um, he is the like third or fourth of the 11, and so he's one of the older ones. And so similarly, he was still put in like in a parentified role. So I
Mm,
didn't clarify this for my mom, but my mom obviously had to care for her younger siblings. My dad left school when he was in middle school to go work to be able to help, help put food on the table for everyone.
yeah.
So every time I see a little boy selling chicles on the street, I think of my dad.
Yeah.
Um, and I think of what that must have been like for him as a kid. And so anyway, so so these are the moments where I'm like, they did all of that so that I would have these different opportunities and how special that is. Um, and so he came to the US on a work permit and he came and started working at the police academy, as the cook in their cafeteria.
Mm,
So as a kid, like it was kind of, I'd go to the police academy a lot, which is actually kind of interesting because I have a very different I had a very different perception of the police because of my dad, because of how we grew
Mm.
up. Um, yes, I didn't feel like in my neighborhood it was a trusted space, but I never felt unsafe when I was at the police academy. Like
Okay.
I was just a kid. I got to play around. They filmed Power Rangers there, and so I was excited. I don't know. Again, these are things I like enjoyed as a child.
Mm.
But yeah, we'd go to the police academy all the time, and that's how I got to be exposed to like different kinds of food that my dad would cook. He'd come home and bring food, and or like different kinds of food, like not because at home we ate Mexican and Salvadorian food, but through my dad, I tried like Italian for the first time, like
Ooh.
fettuccine alfredo or whatever that is, and and I say this because there's another story that segues from that is that when I was in middle school, my teachers took me and a few group of students out to eat, and that was my first experience eating out at a restaurant. We went to a BJ's, and when I tell anyone, I was like BJ's, it's like, oh, whatever BJ's, but to me, it was the biggest deal. Like we're at BJ's, and the menu seems so foreign, but they had fettuccine alfredo, and I was like, I know what this is. I'm gonna order this, but it's anyway, those memories, right? Like it became a core memory for me to remember, like, oh, I'm so intimidated by this place. Now I look back and I'm like, it was just BJ's. Like, why was it so overwhelming for me? But as a kid who'd never gone out to eat, like it's like
Yeah.
literally, hay comida en la casa, me hay comida en la casa. Like it's like yes,
Yeah.
eating out was breakfast at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Um, and I love those memories. But just it kind of shaped like that's kind of the environment I grew up in, and we grew up in this small one-bedroom apartment in a building with 47 other apartments, and that is where it comes back to the cultural enclave. So I had a whole little barrio that I was living in. We had our tiendita in apartment 18. We had
Ooh.
like people, like everyone in the different apartments, like contribute, like there were multiple families who were just living in different units, and so like you felt that community there. And so
Mm.
occasionally my mom would sell choco bananas, and so it was just kind of this community feel. But yeah, you just go knock on someone's door, they have like a little store in their room, in their apartment living room, and you would buy. My dad's like, I want a Coke, go get me a soda. I'm like, okay. And so I'd go to the and so so anyway, so he's very protective in that sense. Now, where do I want to go from this? And so now, anyway, so these are the experiences that I had that helped kind of like, these are my initial experiences into the world, right? I talked
Yeah.
about my mom being very protective.
Yeah.
And she continued, and she did that always, right? And so, in many ways, I think that I was a little bit sheltered, but I know that it was to keep me safe because of the kind of neighborhood we were in. There were gang members who also like lived in the building that I lived in. There were occasional
Mm.
altercations that would occur outside of the building or around my neighborhood. Um, there was definitely a lot of other violence just within the neighborhood that I witnessed and experienced. I used to live by, don't know if you know this because our potential age difference, but I was in third grade when when they tried to rob a bank in North Hollywood at the Bank of America. And I don't know if you know this, there was a shootout. This bank was a few blocks from my elementary school. And so they shut everything down. They shut everything down. They had to pull us out of school. My mom picked me up and had to like walk. We had to walk like this whole way around to just be able to get home because one of the suspects had run into neighborhoods
Escape.
or something. Yeah,
Oh
something
my
happened.
gosh.
And this was, if you look this up, they even made a movie of this. It was really bad. These guys had shown up and they had these like lots of weapons, lots of I guess I won't go into it because it's also just like triggering and stressful. But they actually for a while there had cars on display from that were present at this shootout. And when I would go to different events at the police academy, and they were just riddled with bullet holes.
Oh.
like
wow.
nonstop. So it was that kind of thing. So, but I bring this up because it's just an example of like this maybe wasn't the safest neighborhood I was growing up in, which is again why my mom was very intentional about keeping us safe.
Yeah.
But that day I remember because it was really hard for us to be able to get back home because we lived so close to the bank. They had blocked stuff off,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom had left my little brother with a neighbor when she
Oh.
went to go get me. And so my mom was very stressed out about her baby. Like, how are we going to, like, my
Mm.
son is there. Why don't they let us in? And in fact, my mom was interviewed on the news crying because they wouldn't let us into our building.
Oh.
And like, I remember going to school the next day, and my friends are like, we saw your mom on TV crying. I'm like, yeah, well, that was stressful. So,
Yeah. Oh my
um,
gosh. And I imagine too, just for your mom, it kind of like it was evidence, right, that what she was doing was good, which was like keeping you safe and like keeping you
mhm,
close. Um,
yeah.
I just wanted to also just point out that thank you for sharing so much of it, right? Like your background and like
Yeah.
what the different aspects, because I think that when we
Yeah.
hear first gen, sometimes we assume, like that we all have a similar story, but all of these
Hmm.
nuances, they do create
Yeah.
similarities within who we are, but
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
also has differences, and like how it shows as who we become too.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And I really appreciate you highlighting that because I speak about this all the time. It's like, yes, we have a lot of similarities as first gens, but there's a lot of diversity and like differences within the first gen community.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so for me, I'm like, I like to share these pieces of that because that meant for you all, like if anyone following the story, making connections here, is my parents did not like making any risky decisions. They did
Mm.
not do anything that it was not guaranteed to be, safe, income, whatever. So that's how
Yeah.
they approach life, very much from that scarcity mindset of we can't lose this. We have to be very careful with what we have.
Yeah.
Um, and that prevented them from doing a lot of things. Like they had an opportunity to purchase a home. And it would have been in the budget at this time. I still remember how much it was. It was $100,000 for this
Mm.
house that is now worth like six or $700,000 in that neighborhood. To be clear, it was still in that neighborhood, so it wasn't said like I understand why my parents are like we want to be somewhere safer.
Yeah.
But my parents still live in that same one bedroom apartment that I grew up in, and it was my mom, my dad, me, my brother, and we had a cousin who lived with us for a little bit. Anyone else kind of needed, there was always room for one more if someone needed it,
Mm.
even if it was a small place. There's always room. But that was something else value that my family ingrained in me, right? You never there's always room for someone else. You can always accommodate someone else. You can always help someone. And well, that's a very positive lesson. Even as you hear me say it, you're like, and that also meant that in moments it was hard to prioritize our own needs. Right? It's like, oh, this
Yeah.
person really needs this. Okay, we have our basic needs. We should help them. Like we should do this, right? Um, so anyway, so that's yeah, I'm a younger brother and I'm the oldest. And so growing up, I remember my parents learning English. I remember that journey with them together. I remember helping them study and prepare for their citizenship exam. I remember, sitting in my dad's white truck that he had, and we would play the tape again, the cassette, who is the president of the United States, and like
Yeah.
practicing all of these things to help him ready for his exam. So we did that together, and as the oldest, there was a lot of translating for my parents and either you get the phone calls or like, I don't know what this is. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm here translating.
Hablan inglés, ven, ven.
Hablan inglés
Córrele.
and oh, we have this form you have to fill out, and here you are, a 10-year-old who just learned how to read probably. I mean, and and it doesn't fully actually comprehend. It's like, okay, we're gonna fill this out, we're gonna do this.
Yeah. Setting
Translating,
setting up the internet, like habla con ellos
uh,
a ver cómo le haces.
yes, all of it. So all of these things they happen, but like um setting up the internet didn't happen until I was in high school
Oh yeah,
because
same.
I like it didn't, and we didn't have yeah, no, it was a process. But yeah, we got a computer when I was in high school. It was nice, but it was, it was loud, you couldn't use the phone while you were on the
Yeah.
computer for, like it was one of those, everything was slow. Um, but yeah, so anyway, just to set up, it's like I was already placed in this caregiver role very early on in supporting of my parents, but they also were placed in those roles, so they were supporting, so this was just what was
Yeah.
expected.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And so when I talked about my healing my narrative, I used to look back at that experience with a lot of frustration. And I
Mm.
used to think of the childhood that I didn't get to have, the experiences maybe I didn't that I wish I would have had. Particularly when people ask about, different childhood related things that you'd expect. It's like, what was your favorite present that you got when you were a kid? And I'm like, I never asked for anything because I was like, I don't know that my parents could afford this. I'm just not going to ask. And so with those memories, I'm like, I don't have anything that was like the favorite gift or the whatever, but that's okay, right? But in those moments I would feel almost resentment, like, well, why don't I have this? Why didn't I? Whatever. Um, but when I look back at my narrative now, while yes, I still grieve the moments of childhood that I wish I had, I remind myself that I can give myself those moments now,
Mm.
and or those gifts now, and I look back and think of the gift that I was able to give my parents,
Wow.
the gift. And so I'm like, I was able to be that bridge for them. And that was very special. Although in that moment it was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
When I look back, I'm like, I'm so happy that I was able to do that. And so,
Oh my
yeah.
God. I never thought about it that way. Like
Yeah.
that in a way
Mhm.
we gift them like
Yeah.
it's a sacrifice, right? Like amongst the
Mhm.
sometimes I think growing up we're made feel like only they are doing the sacrifices for our life, right? Like that
Mhm.
only they're the ones like estamos sacrificando para que tú tengas una vida mejor. But now as
Mhm.
you're speaking, like I'm like, yeah, that is a sacrifice that sometimes as parentified first gens,
Mhm.
like we also give,
Yeah.
right? We lend a hand. We're the attentive as much as like as
Mhm.
much as we're children, we're attentive to our siblings, our parents. Like, how can we be of service, as we're growing up?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And so I love that you phrase that. But yeah, it was a bit of sacrifice, but instead of thinking of it as sacrifice, I think of it again as a gift. And then I remind myself, I'm like, and now you're in a different place. And so now you get yourself the toys, you get yourself the whatever. I'm like looking around, I'm like, and that's it's like, and so I have like behind me like my little stress balls. They're all toys.
Oh.
They're all one of them. Um, and I have, and I think you can see her, and I tengo mi muñeca, right?
Oh.
And it makes me, you can see her in the back.
Yeah.
Um, and all these things, they make me happy and they bring me joy. And learning to reconnect with that as part of my healing has been really important. Especially because it's a journey that I support my clients on as well,
Yeah.
right? So now, because I brought it back to my work, I'll say that that's my narrative, and that's how I feel with my narrative, looking back on this and thinking about it as this gift and as this bridge that I got to be in. What a beautiful part of my story to have. Um, I don't advocate that everyone should have that narrative. That's
Mm.
mine, right?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think we heal our narratives in different ways, and that's part of
Yeah.
what's helped me.
Yeah. And I think as time goes by, it can transform
Mhm.
too, right? Like, for
Yes.
example, as you get more information, personally,
Mhm.
I recently had a conversation with my mom where I'm like, I just feel like there was so much struggle, and I'm like, for what? Like now, I feel like that my parents are divorced, and everyone's kind of in their own kind of camino,
Mhm.
and things didn't come to fruition the way that maybe we all thought they would, the vision that we had, and so she was like, pues. You know, I never had a birthday and you guys I celebrated every single one of your birthdays, right? And she's like, so if you ask me para qué fue, like, fue para eso, you know? And for
Mhm.
me, like,
Yeah.
it was so special because it changes the way I look back at the
Mhm.
times as like stressful or as maybe as little
Yeah.
adult as I felt, I'm like, wow, that gives it such a different light, that maybe
Hmm.
because of the information, I didn't know that my mom didn't celebrate any of her birthdays growing up.
Yeah, right. And as you learn more, it can help you develop a different perspective, right? Like, and so to be clear, when I made, what that prompted me to think about, it's like I made this comment, it's like, oh, there was never any gift that I was like, oh, I really want this, right? And that I like got or whatever. However, I did get other gifts in thinking about my parents always made sure I had cake on my birthday, right?
Mm,
I think my parents always made sure. So like, I want to be clear that doesn't mean that I didn't have things. I just didn't ask for anything extra. I think I probably wanted an
mm.
easy oven or something as a kid, but I would never
Oh,
have
yeah.
asked. I would have never asked for it. That's all.
Yeah.
I was always just grateful for whatever they gave me, whatever it was. And it didn't matter where it was from. And that always, in that moment, felt like enough. But now I'm allowed to give, like, for me, I guess those felt like luxuries. But now as an adult, I'm like, well, I can give myself these luxuries and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Oh, and it's a fun phase, right, when you get to do that. Because also,
Oh
even
my
I
God.
think into our adulthood, it does take us some time to get to a safe, like in
Hmm.
a place with certain level of income security, right? So it does take some time, but once we're
Yes.
there, it's like sweet, like yay, we get to spoil ourselves a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially when you decide to go to grad school and you're basically a broke grad student for
Mm,
13 years. And so it
yeah.
was and yeah, and so I haven't even gotten into that, right? So, so I when you say tell me my story, it's like I have to share my parents. I have to share about them first. And then, and I'm the oldest on my like mom's side. I'm one of the oldest in terms of like all the cousins who live together. So like kind
Mm,
of that dynamic, the eldest sister mindset, the eldest cousin mind, like all of that is deeply ingrained inside of me. Um,
yeah.
but I think that's also why I was drawn to the work that I do. So
Mm,
let me transition into sharing like how all of this shaped into like why I am like why do I want to be a psychologist?
yeah.
Um, so I decided I wanted to be a psychologist when I was in middle school. Like, I'm going to be a psychologist. I'm going to do this. I had been exposed to a psychologist when I was in kindergarten because I had, surprise, separation anxiety from my mom.
Mm,
Um, and so, like, I literally would like grab her leg when she would drop me off. And I was like, do not. I have so many fears of abandonment. I think, again, remember my mom was a cautious, very like careful, like, and so I think some of those worries were being transferred over to me because I'm like, oh, am I going to be safe without her? Am I going to be okay?
mm,
And I don't remember too much of the experience with the therapist, but I was exposed to them and I understood they help you.
okay.
Like, and they make things better and they make you feel better. Like they give you tools. Now, I remember I was very little, so I don't remember too much more again. And then middle school, at some point, I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a psychologist. And I think I told my teacher in seventh grade, and I remember this because her answer also required some healing of my narrative. Her answer was, I can see you doing that. You have doctor handwriting. And so
Oh, okay.
that is what she said. But what I heard and what I focused on was, I can see you doing that. Like, I can see you being a doctor. And I was like, that is all I'm going to hold on to. I'm not going to hold on to the nuanced aspect of whatever she was trying to say about my handwriting because y'all, we type everything now.
Yeah.
So whatever. Um, but yeah, my handwriting is doctor's handwriting. So I'll own that. Um, but anyway, so yeah, so that's my memory. The first time I was sharing that with someone, it was like, this is what I want to do. And initially, it was just because I witnessed it all around me constantly, people talking about mental health, but not talking about mental health. And
Mm, interesting.
talking about the nervios or susto, or, like my family starting to believe in going to curanderos when we were sick. And so going
Mm,
into these spaces and, I'm like, oh, how does this connect to like how we think, how we interact with the world? And I found myself always trying to solve these like puzzles that I've created, right? Trying to find the connections. Um, and it wasn't anything I would see anywhere, right? Like even when I finally went to college and went to get see a therapist in college, there were no BIPOC clinicians for me to choose from at the time. It was just someone assigned. I spent a lot of time having to share my story, and I kept thinking, this person doesn't get it. Like they're not understanding it. And that frustrated me because I'm like, I want to do this, and I'm here with someone doing what I want to do, but they're not doing it right. And I'm like, what is missing?
Wow.
I was like, what is missing? And the cultural aspect is what was missing, right? The underlying nuanced things that I didn't realize how important they were for me to share openly. And the therapist didn't have enough awareness to ask me about, right?
For sure.
So so anyway, made up my mind, decided that's what I was going to do. No idea. I had no idea what you needed to be a psychologist. They didn't even offer psychology classes at my high school. I don't think. I think I started to just read books and I was just interested in it. And when I applied to colleges, declared psychology as my major. And I applied to colleges, applied to the schools that my waiver allowed. So we had in California, you get like I think it was 6 schools that I was able to apply for free, 4 UCs, 2 Cal States. That's it. That's all. I applied there. And I remember not having any idea of what it was like how am I gonna get in, hearing all these things back. I got into every school I applied to. I got into every
Wow.
school I applied to. And and so like when I think back, I'm like, man, like I always wonder what it would have been like if I had support from teachers like who helped me and they sat with me and they like helped me with my applications and I'm so grateful for that. But I only applied to these public schools, right? Because I in my mind I'm like how could I could only go anywhere with my Pell Grants or with the funding that I get, right? So
Yeah.
um but all right, so we'll move faster through this. This last part's not as so that's these are the stories, these are what shape me. But yeah, in my high school, you have these teachers who see you and want to support you and connect with you. And I'm so grateful for all of them, particularly Mr. Fitz, Mr. Fitzgerald. So Mr. Fitz, he was like the director of this academy that I was in high school. At the time, it was they had divided the school into smaller learning communities to help. And I was in the Transportation Careers Academy. And so that one was about urban planning. But you know what that did for me actually is that it nourished, well, I didn't realize it then, but it helped nourish my comfort with public speaking.
Mm.
Although it has still been a long journey, but we had to do presentations constantly. And we had to speak with urban planners in the city, and we had to always use public transportation. So it also helped me learn how to navigate my city, right? It's
Mm.
you're going here, but you are not allowed to drive. Your parents cannot drop you off. You have to take the bus or you will lose points.
Wow.
Okay, okay, so I'm gonna figure this out. And I was terrified, but I'm like, we're gonna figure it out. I'm gonna do this. Um, but yeah, we had a lot of public speaking stuff, and then I guess another fun part, aside of me that I don't share very much, I also was in dance team when I was in high school, and so we did the performances, performed at the halftime shows, football games. I got to travel through that, so that exposed me with comfort being away.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So it sounds like you
Yeah.
also got a rich high school experience where you were allowed to do some stuff on the side, right? Because as much as
Mm.
your parents were protective, because I feel like my parents were protective, but that meant I couldn't do much other than school, go home. It was kind of like
Yeah.
that kind of protection.
If it was school related, I was allowed to do it.
Ah, okay.
If
Okay.
it was school related, I was allowed to do it. And what I loved about again these teachers, they would talk to my parents. They would take the time to like help them understand, and especially when we had to travel for competitions, because we traveled to San Francisco and to Vegas for
Wow.
our things, which were we'd go on the bus and a long time. Um, and I was a good kid. I followed all the rules. I stuck to the curfew. I was always the rule follower. That was always me because I was just terrified of like getting this privilege taken away from me. But yes, I'm like they're strict, but if it was academic related and it could help me with like my goal of going to college, then it was fine.
Mm.
So that's how dance team was allowed, and that's why I also participated in some of the musicals at my school, and that's why that was also allowed. I was allowed to stay for
Wow.
practices. I was allowed to do these things because it was academic related.
Mhm.
Um, Anything outside of school was in oh, well, actually, that's a lie. The one thing that they did let me do outside of school, but they enrolled me in was karate. But
Oh.
again, if you think about it, it was so that I would learn how to defend myself. And so I got up to brown belt, not gonna brag, but didn't make it to black. That was just one more test available. But yeah, middle school, this all happened in middle school. When I entered high school, I had to choose karate or dance team. And
Okay.
if I'm also honest with you, I chose dance team because if I did dance team, I didn't have to do gym.
Okay.
So there was a lot of me being as strategic as I could with the experiences that I had, right? Um, so definitely, yeah, the high school is definitely a very rich experience for me in terms of the social, um, like being involved in more of the social aspects of it through these like I guess events that I get to go to.
Yeah.
And then in my senior year, I was actively involved in like the senior committees. I was like vice president. Um, and being the extroverted social butterfly that I was at the time, I also I was prom queen my year. So it was so when you say that, I'm like, I remember I had a blast in high school. No one ever like I was never insecure about anything because again, I didn't there were things I didn't think about. I wasn't aware of because in that moment I was just in my bubble of like getting to choose these like it was just in a bubble of like how am I going to be a psychologist? What makes me more competitive? If I do all of these things, it helps. Um, and that was the focus of it. What I cannot relate to are all of the high school parties that I would see on TV. And how do you sneak out of a one-bedroom apartment? Okay, it's just really hard. Now, obviously, my parents let me go to prom. They let me go to these things, but I was home by midnight. I was,
Yeah.
there was just a lot of rules around it, but it happened. Um,
Okay.
and then came the time to go to college, and my parents, had been like, yes, college, go to college. Like, we're so supportive of all of this. And then it hits them that I might move away
Mm.
or that I was going to move away because Priscilla, when we talk about being strategic,
Oh,
those six
girl.
schools, those six schools, none of them were drivable from where we lived. Nothing that was like, I was like, if it is close enough for me to drive to it, I'm not applying to it. I'm not applying to it.
I'm laughing because that's how I thought of it too.
So
I
there
was
we go.
like,
We have
I was like, how am I moving out?
exactly, right? You do these things because you're like, how do I negotiate figuring this out? And I was again strategic. I ended up going to UC San Diego because you remember my dad's family lives in a border town. So they're in Tecate. My parents are in LA. And I'm like, this is perfect. I'm literally in between both of them. So close to family if I need on both sides. And so it's great. It'll be great.
Yeah.
I wish that it was as easy for my parents to see my vision of it initially, but they did not. They did not understand the vision. They were not happy about my vision. So this is where the more of the protective parenting came in. But they had a very stubborn child who said, "I'm doing it anyway," and I'm grateful for that part of my personality. Um, and so yeah, when I got into the schools, we visited the camp, like we visited UC San Diego first. And I'm like, because then we get into Tecate to see family after, because again, it was on the way. And I fell in love with the campus when I was there, and I was like, this is where I want to go. This is where I want to be.
Aw.
Um, and my parents were not happy about my decision. But you know what? They dropped me off. My dad dropped me off. My dad and my cousin dropped me off on campus to move into the dorms. My mom was very upset with me and had said that I had been brainwashed and she was not happy that I was moving. And my mom's mom, my grandmother, I remember when I had first moved in, called me to yell at me and to tell
Oh
me
no.
like she's like, your mom is sick and it's your fault. It's your fault because you left.
Oh.
And with sick again, sick, what was my mom feeling? She was anxious, she was stressed, she was worried, she was scared. but because again there was no understanding of mental health, it all somaticized. So she was having physical symptoms. She's like had terrible headaches, terrible nightmares.
Mhm.
And then I was blamed for it because I went against her wishes. Um, and when I asked them, what did you think was going to happen? You encouraged me to go to college. You wanted me to do this. This is something you've always said was important. Um, and they were like, we just thought you'd go to community college
Mm.
here, and then you'd live here till you were 25. And at that point you'd get married, and then someone else would take care of you.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, no. Obviously, in the same way you talked about with your mom, like when you learn more information, like it helps shift your perspective. Or my parents realized, like, oh, she really is going to school. She really like wants to study, like she wants to do this. They understood and they accepted it. And they have apologized. They have said,
Oh.
like we realized that there was a lot we didn't understand at that time. And so I'm very appreciative that I have parents that are willing to own up to that and acknowledge that because not everyone gets that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so hard. I mean, like, it's so layered. I imagine, you mentioned you had separation anxiety. Probably your mom had it back, right? Like,
Oh
she was.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then, too, I imagine they were in survival mode all of these years. Like, as
Mhm.
much as they were around and they were protective, like, likely it flew by
Yeah.
for them because they weren't
Yeah.
able to be present. There was probably a fight or flight most of that journey. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But like when I look back at everything, I'm like, they were always doing, it was always out of love. Like I was loved. I was definitely loved so much and cared for. It was just the way that they could do it, right? And so sometimes that meant, my mom, I think when I went to college, because she wanted to be able to help me financially. And to this day, Priscilla, actually to this day, they do not let me pay for anything. They will
Wow.
not. And if I go out, we go to dinner, I'll pay for it. The money is in my account the next day. My mom and she goes to the bank. She's like, no. She's like, you're my daughter. I'm gonna pay for this. But it was always, in every way that they could when they realized, like, however they could support me, they would, right? And so, like, although there were lots of things I wanted to do that maybe I didn't get, or whatever it was, like, whatever I had very loving, supporting parents who were doing their absolute best. And I think at that age, I didn't understand it. So
Yeah.
that's why my narrative was like, I felt bad about it. But when I look back and then the way that you share, you're like, oh, it sounds like you did this. I'm like, you're right. Like it was. But as a kid, I wanted more because I wanted what my friends had. I wanted all of these other things and I didn't get them.
Yeah.
So but yeah, I went to college but yeah, I say it's their support because it's, I got an on-campus job. I still did all of the things because I didn't want my parents to have to like worry about things. But every so often is Mija, do you need some money? Like, can I help you with anything? Like, like I had a full scholarship, so my tuition was covered. Um, most of my dorm was covered. I had to pay a certain amount a month, and I think my parents helped me with that as well. I did as well with like the part-time jobs that I would have. Um, but like if I wanted to come home, like most of the time I take the train, but occasionally my dad's like, I'm just gonna come pick you up or I'll drop you off. Like that's how they showed with their time, like that's what they could give me. And so now I look back and now, like I said, it's like we look at it a little bit differently. But what I love the most is that my parents do too. So I'm grateful that they have been also on this journey of me, I think, going through this education and me being able to come back and sort of try to help expose them to some of what I learned has, they don't take all of it in. Like my mom still doesn't go to therapy, but she does reflect more. She does it through her own way. She does it through prayer and meditation. And so I'm happy that she's willing to do that, to reflect and think back. And every so often, She will have like a moment of reflection and she'll call me and say, I'm sorry, for
Wow.
whatever it is, which is very, very special. And this is very, very new. And
Okay.
so she'll do that. And I'm like, Mom, there's a point where I'm like, it's okay. Like
Oh,
you were
yeah.
doing your best, like I hear you. You don't have to apologize for it over and over again. Like it's okay. My mom had a temper when I was growing up. So
Mhm.
that's where the apologies come from.
Mhm.
Um, and so but again, she was 23 when she had me. She was a little girl herself, and she was learning. And so that's what I always remind her. I'm like, you were also just learning, and you were disciplining me the way you were disciplined. You were doing things the way you thought was the best way, and that's okay. Um, and same with my dad. I'm like, you were just doing that, and now you can look back and want to do things differently, and that to me is part of the healing. But yeah, uh, again, these experiences, all of that is part of what really fuels the work that I do because I work with first gen professionals, and many of them are children of immigrants, if not, in that one point, like that generation that's or sandwich generation where they came for their parents and their children. Um,
Yeah.
and in a lot of my work, we talk about like with the healing, it's like a lot of them want to heal the relationship that they have with their parents. And so it's so beautiful to be able to be a part of that journey for the people I work with, of
Yeah.
watching their relationships when it's possible, because
Mhm.
relationships are, if you have to all parties involved are need to want to change.
Yeah.
If and I find that most of the time with the people that I'm working with, when my client is ready to want to work on that relationship, most of the people I'm working with, their parents are open to it. That's not the case with everyone. Being able to share this part of my narrative, like in this space, reminds me of like why it's so healing for them to have that space with me.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think sometimes, or many of the times, people may be attracted to your work and attracted to this podcast. It's like the first in the family to bring these things to the family, right? And so,
Mhm.
exactly, maybe at first it's met with
Yeah,
rejection or confusion or
yeah.
egos get in the way. So, there's a lot to work through. And so I think, yeah, it's really special that you get to work with people in that journey because it's not an easy one, right? Especially when you're navigating your own healing and it's like,
Mhm.
that's confusing. And then also, we're very close to our family. So like, it's kind of like managing all parts at a similar time.
Yes, yes. And also like adjusting what close means and looks like, and having to separate between I want to do this and I have to do this. And leaning into more like I want to, because the narrative is like, oh, I have a family, I have to go to this. And when you're thinking about it that way, like no quiere decir, you're like, well, it feels like a chore. Um, and so, now a lot of my mind, like noticing like about anything when I have this I like when I feel that negativity around it, I'm like, okay, hold on, why am I feeling so negative about this? Like what am I actually avoiding here? Like what's the discomfort from? Like, oh, I'm tired, I if I go, I feel like I'm gonna feel obligated to be there the whole time. It's like, okay, well, do I want to go? If the answer is yes, it's remind yourself like I can go and I don't have to stay hasta la medianoche, like I can go see everyone for like an hour and leave. Now, will everyone probably make a comment about it? Probably, but like I got to do what felt good to me, and I get to go home when it feels good to me. So that's part of the learning journey. But to go back to the story briefly, to get to the point I got to now, right? This gets faster because then when you're in college, there's structure, right? Like in college, joined all the programs to help me kind of figure it out. So I was part of Trio. I did McNair because I'm like, when I got to school, I learned that to be a psychologist, you needed a doctoral degree.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought I'm gonna go to UCSD and I'm gonna graduate as a psychologist.
Mm,
No, it takes more than 4 years. It took it took 13 years. So it was 4 years of undergrad, and then through that I applied to doctoral programs. And I had an interview for one school. Um, I was waitlisted there, and then, but I then was admitted to a master's program at Columbia. Columbia was my reach school. I didn't even, it was the moment where I'm like, why not apply to an Ivy League school? Like I didn't apply during undergrad, why not apply? And when I got in there, I realized I had another dream, which was to be able to like explore more. And the idea of living in New York was just like, I
ooh.
was just like, I'm like, I don't know why else I would move to New York other than school. I went to New York. Again, got a lot of scholarships to help me cover the
Mm,
costs, took out loans for what the rest that I needed. I didn't have, I think I had like very little debt for my undergrad for like, I think my last year when I needed extra money to help me pay for like housing or whatever. Um, so I was like, it's okay. This is an investment. My parents, again, terrified. Why are you? First of all, they thought I was going to Colombia. They're like, where's that? And I'm like, no, Dad, it's in New York. It's okay. It's just there. And then again, are you trying to get away from us? No, it's a really
mm,
good university. It's a very good program. It would open a lot of doors for me. It's very good for my future. Um, and honestly, I grew a ton in New York because it was the first time, like I moved away in San Diego, but it was still familiar.
yeah. Yeah.
Moving to a new state, I don't know if you've ever lived in another state or like have had that experience. If you felt that you grew up quickly as a parent of a child, move to a new city in your early 20s and experience, or even at 18, like that really pushes your growth as well because there's so much you have to learn and navigate on your own. And I lived in New York before I had a smartphone, so I also had to like understand where I
Mm,
was. That is also how I learned how to tell directions because New York City's on a grid system. So I learned how to navigate it. And I guess honed in that fearlessness that I described of my parents, right? Like
yeah.
doing not maybe not do fearlessness, but like doing it even though you're afraid. Everything that they did even though they were afraid. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, I can do this even though I'm afraid. Because in the moment when it was happening, I felt so much joy, right? Like when I was in, it was amazing. I miss my family. I miss them so much. Like being that far away was really hard. Um, and and I was having all these new experiences that like helped me shape me again to who I am now. And that's when I started to do therapy for the first time. I got to do
Ah.
therapy for the first time in New York. And it was in Spanish. That's where I learned how to do therapy in Spanish. And it was so different because again, I'm a Southern California girl. Like I grew up being around a lot of immigrants from Mexico, Central America, like El Salvador, Guatemala. And here I am exposed to a different dialect of Spanish, where my clients at the end are like, yeah, ya aprendiste a hablar español, like you finally learned, because when I first got there, apparently I couldn't speak it because I still called beans frijoles, but they're habichuelas, right?
Oh,
But yeah, so I was working with a lot of Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban immigrants, and so it's just like very, very different.
okay.
But that experience again helps me better understand everyone who I work with, and especially when we're talking about the Latina experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I'm so grateful for that. And so yeah, I was there, loved New York, and in my heart, I'm still like, but I want to be a psychologist. Like for the master's, yes, I'm a therapist, but like I just kept thinking back to my college where none of my professors looked like me, and if there were any professors who looked like me, they were in the Chicane, like Chicano studies department, or they were like in like Latin American studies department. And but in my psychology department, no one. It was all white. We did have some female professors, but like that was the diversity, right?
Yeah.
And so at my heart, I'm like, I'm so tired of not having that diversity, and it's so important for me to like be that representation. Um, and so I applied to PhD programs and interviewed at a few schools and ultimately got into the University of Oregon. Because my goal was to get back on the same time zone as my parents. It's like, let me be on the same coast. Um, and it may be a shorter flight away. And so then we got made it to Oregon. And y'all, okay, New York was a very diverse city with a very not diverse program.
Mm,
Oregon
mm.
was not a diverse city, but my program was very diverse.
Oh,
So it was very, very interesting to kind of have that switch. Like,
yeah.
and also to be a city girl to go to the first small, it's a college town, but to me, the smallest town I've ever lived in. And so but Oregon taught me the value of a soft life. Even though I was stressed out because of grad school, there was a lot you couldn't do because you had to slow down. You go to the grocery store and the people at the checkout stands want to have a whole conversation with you. You're not just in and out, in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the beginning, I used to avoid this one cashier because I'm like, I don't want to talk about my day with her. I'm just gonna go to the other line. um, but in Oregon, I loved Oregon, but I hated it the first 2 years. So I hated it because again, there wasn't as much diversity. I just felt pretty isolated aside from my colleagues and my cohort. Um, and afterwards, what helped was finding my community there. And so I started working at Centro Latinoamericano. So I was working again with mi gente, and that always felt really good, and being connected with just the different like resources. And also leaning on, I said a diverse cohort. So there were a lot of people in my program who are also Latina. And so like we found community in that. Um, and PhDs are hard. Uh, any doctoral program is, but my program, at the end of it, I shifted and was like, I'm going to work at a university counseling center or private practice, or I want to be leaning into my clinical skills because the academic part, as much as I originally that's what I wanted, I realized that it was these spaces were still too um they still felt too toxic for me. Like
Mm,
I don't know if you hear public or parish mentality. I just felt at the time that if I was continuing in academia, that I would just continue to feel the same stress and pressures that I felt as a grad student.
mm,
And I did not like the stress and pressure of the grad student life. And so it was a lot. So um, and what I want to say behind the scenes in all of this is I was working with a therapist because and I think everyone in grad school, everyone in my cohort, um, like was working with someone, was taking medication or was self-medicating in some way because of the stress that we
wow.
experience.
Yeah.
So I think two of my cohort members ended up having to have surgeries that I think were a result of like just the chronic stress. So just to describe how that environment can feel,
Yeah.
um, even in places that like promote having a lot of support for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to note because
Yeah,
it can be not glamorized, but I think it's like admirable to see someone that does go after a PhD and does
yeah,
the program. However, it's also important to note there does need to be
yeah,
support and it's okay to ask for that, right? Because I think as
yeah.
first gens, we're not used to thinking like we need any type of support. We have to be able to do it on our own. That's what we think or our
Mhm.
mentality. So it's important that you note that.
Exactly. And I think, and a lot of the time I felt like I was actively needing to prove myself. So I'm like,
Mhm.
and I was too afraid to, whenever there was something that didn't feel good or where maybe there was a miscommunication, I was too afraid to confront because it was just so overwhelming and so scary. And so anyway, now I actually run a Latinx doctoral mentorship circle. I don't promote this because it's a closed group, but after these experiences, once I graduated, that was like one of the first things that I did because I'm like, I know that that was hard, but it was also hard because I felt so disempowered.
Mm,
And all I needed was a little bit of encouragement from someone else who maybe I had more trust in. And to be clear, Priscilla, like I did actually try to ask for help sometimes. Um, and the first time I asked for help, I was so discouraged because the person, she was a Latina. She was in the like advising department for like the multicultural office that was on campus, so separate from my department. And she was like working with the predominantly like Latina students. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna go ask her. Like, I'm new here. I need some help. I need help with resources. And I know I'm struggling. I know I'm stressed. Like I'm having a hard time, but I know that I want to do this and I just need help. And I went to her office. I made an appointment. I was like very much like, okay, this is going to be hard, but it's okay. And she like listens to me. I'm crying there, like sharing, just being very vulnerable. And finish. And at the end of everything I shared, she looks at me and she says, "Are you sure a PhD is the right thing for you? Like,
mm,
do you want like and I was so frustrated because I'm like, I came here because I want to complete this program. I came here because I wanted your help. And and yes, I'm stressed about it, but that doesn't mean that I'm not capable of
right.
completing this. And so, but I couldn't say that to her now. I just looked at her and was like, I can't believe I like couldn't believe that like I guess saying it out loud, I was like, I can see in some ways maybe why she felt was like, oh man, you seem like you're going through it, you know? But like I'm here saying I know I'm struggling, but I want to finish this and I need help, and you're discouraging me from completing this degree.
Yeah.
And that didn't feel good. And so I didn't go back to her to ask for help, since
Mm,
obviously, because I felt so discouraged. Um, and I will share there were actually other instances where there were people who I thought could be allies and I'd asked for help and maybe it didn't work out as well. So because of that, I did the mentorship circle for Latinx doctoral students because I'm like, I think sometimes we don't know where to find our allies and we just need a little help with that.
yeah.
So what you'll learn about me is that I've learned that it's like when I experience a challenge and if there's a way I can help someone else not have to go through that, I like will do it. Um, and so I and I think that's what drives the work that I do now, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, graduated, obviously, became a licensed psychologist. That
How
was also
long
hard.
how long ago was that?
Oh man, yeah, I took you all the journey. Remember, I talked about cassettes at the beginning of this, okay? So I graduated in 2018, so
18.
summer
Okay.
2018, and I became a licensed psychologist December 2019. So I have been a licensed psychologist for what is it, four and a half, 4-ish years.
Okay.
And I have been in private practice for full time for a year and a half.
Okay, private. Which means you're not part of like a group practice, right? So it's like
Yeah.
your own thing.
Yeah. So I
Okay.
used to work at a university counseling center. I was working at the Claremont colleges and I loved working there.
Oh, okay.
I loved working with the students. I just um, working in just working in mental health during the pandemic was very hard. Oh, it was very hard. There was a very high burnout, and it led to challenges for me. And I found that I as much as I wanted to be a part of a system and like support students through the system, there's going to always be challenges that happen when you're one of the first and onlys in any kind of space. And
Yeah.
so I was one of the first few and onlys. And so I was one of the only like Spanish speaking clinician. I was one of the only like Latina clinicians. Um, and uh, and so then that meant that my caseload was just a little bit fuller than some of my colleagues rotating. Um, and I loved the work that I was doing, but I was getting burnt out. And so my now husband actually when we met is like was who inspired me to transition to working for myself. Because again, remember we go back to my childhood, this job is a sure thing. Entrepreneurship, there is no security in entrepreneurship. There is a literal leap of faith. Like every other experiences at first gen, they're all leaps of faith. Um, but they're usually leaps of faith into some kind of structure, right?
Yeah,
Like into a job, into a university, whatever it is.
yeah.
This is my first leap of faith into just betting on me in a very different way. And my now husband, his name's Herschel. So Herschel, what he said to me was, you know, like he like noticed, like I can tell that this is really stressing you out, but he's like, these jobs, they're not going anywhere. You have an opportunity to just try to bet on yourself. And if it doesn't work, you can go back. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But he's like, but I think you owe it to yourself to try and give yourself a chance because you're having a hard time. And um and you know this, and actually starting once I started the process of this, I'm like, who's uniquely qualified to be really good entrepreneurs? It's first gens.
Ooh, I love that you say that.
It's
Yeah.
first gen. It is
Yes.
first gen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I love that you're mentioning this because in the intro of the podcast, like the very first episode, I mentioned,
Yeah.
I think that sometimes our parents' stories scare us into staying in a certain lane, in a certain job, in a certain career, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
why would we jeopardize like the safety
Yeah.
that we're starting to attain after so much struggle? But then I say like, but what I want us to like remember is
Yeah.
embrace that story into like that's
Yeah.
exactly why we're qualified to do that, right? And why we dare take a chance on ourselves, even when it like exactly it's a very different journey for first chance because
Yeah.
usually it's like following the steps and that gives you the like security
Hmm.
even though it's scary. This one's very different, but it's very
Yes.
aligned to like, hey, our parents started from scratch, like in a different country than they did it. So can we in a different way, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly. So can we in a different way. And you got to lean on all the skills that we develop. So although it's like, yes, this is a big risk, first gens are adaptable, resilient, resourceful, like, and I mean that, like, creative, civic minded, like, and by civic minded, it's like, and we're always wanting to do it for some cause that's going to be helpful to others, right? So, like, in my heart, I was like, always felt that I wanted to be in something where I was able to help people in some way, right? That's why I became a psychologist, and but my passion's always been bigger than that, and I think it's sometimes too big for like I think I've always just been a
Mm.
dreamer. I've always been a dreamer, um, and and I think that as children of immigrants, I think all of us honestly have really big dreams, but I think that you said it really well is that but sometimes our fears or the was it risk averseness that we experience is what holds us back from making these dreams a reality. Um, because you are essentially risking it all, right? And that's what it feels like in those moments, right? So, but I felt finally comfortable to risk it and I say risk it because at this point I had this degree, like, Herschel's right. Like I had so much to fall back on. I had worked really hard to create a safety net. So I better use this damn safety net, right? Like I created it so that I could have it. So let's just, like full send, just reach for the as like reach for the biggest star. And so we did that. And so now we're here a year and a half later of my private practice, like 4 years after I think starting to show up more online slowly, because you gotta take breaks every so often because it's hard. It's hard to keep up with everything. And doing the work that I love with the people I love to work with and getting to spread the message of destigmatizing mental health like a broken record that I want to be, because once we can get past this, and I see it, and I see younger generations really normalizing therapy and even being surprised when someone hasn't been to a therapist, right? So like I that makes me so happy. And not everyone is there yet, particularly our older generations, because I'll tell you, Priscilla, when I was working at the University Counseling Center, every student that came in was experiencing the same challenges that I experienced when I was their age. And I'm like, it has been a very long time since I was their age, and they are experiencing the same dynamic with their parents.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why I do the work that I do now, because I'm like, no, we still need everyone out here challenging that narrative, or that terapias para locos, that like it's only for white people, that whatever like barrier there is, right? Distrust of the medical system. And the way we disrupt that is by having that representation, because you know, I feel more comfortable with you when like with or I, when you have a shared identity, because I know you get something in a different level that someone else doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Woo! Such
Yeah.
important work.
Thank
Woo!
you. Thank you. I know that
Yes.
was a lot. That was an emotional journey. Yeah.
No, I mean, thank you so much for sharing it all because I think, yeah, all of these
Yeah.
pieces, I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to just the different aspects, even like wanting to be a part of a system and then also recognizing that you're ready to exit it, right? That like
Yes.
you're running up against walls. That I think is what a lot of people are going through. And
Yeah.
it can be really scary, but it's good for us to share that message too, like that it's doable, you're qualified. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone at their own pace, of course, but like it's good to
Hmm.
mention. Yeah. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and so,
Yeah.
with that being said, I do want to wrap up part one so that we
Yes.
can go into part two, where we're going to talk about an experience that I think a lot of first gens share, which is the first gen, the G word, the first gen guilt.
Yes.
So we're going to dive deep into that topic. But before we close today's part one out, I always like to give the guests an opportunity to just give a message to those first gens that are listening. If you have something to share, what would you say? And then we'll close this part out.
This is a hard one, because there's just so much I want to say. So follow me at, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
No,
yes.
it's like, no, no,
Plug
but
yourself.
no, if this is resonating, yes, I'm the first gen psychologist on Instagram, and that's where I'm most active. But what I will want to say to all first gens who are listening, I hope the biggest takeaway that I hope you have from my story is that a lot of life is always very scary, and a lot of these experiences are really hard, but you can do hard things, and you can do them when you're afraid. And that that each time you do it, it'll inspire more courage in you and in the people around you. So be willing to bet on yourself.
Oh, so beautiful.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And yes, please follow her. I'm going to, of course, include her information in the
Thank
description of
you.
the episode. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, First Gen.
Thank you.
Remember to share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues if you found it helpful. And remember, I love you. I love me. And I can't wait for you to love yourself.
Oh, I love that.